Recently, I made a video talking about the game Doki Doki Literature Club.
You should go watch it.
While I was making that video, I got to thinking about all kinds of games that I like to play that are either really popular with a niche group of people or aren't really that popular now, or maybe they never were. It's going to be these games that I'm referring to when I use the phrase guilty pleasure games. Hi, I'm Danny, or Chase, or neither, and I love video games. They're unquestionably my favorite art medium, and over the years I've played tons of them. I've probably collectively spent more time playing video games than doing just about any other thing you can imagine. You know, reading, writing, walking, breathing. A lot of people, even today, think that playing video games is a waste of time, which is why I want to take that wasted time and turn it into something a little bit more. Today, I'm going to be talking about my guilty pleasure games. But why? Do I have some kind of ulterior motive with this? Do I want to change some people's minds and show them how awesome video games can be? No. Do I want to seek approval from strangers on the internet by showing them things that I'm interested in hopes that they agree with me? Yes. No. I have at least one motivation for making this video, and I'll take a quick moment to explain what that is. See, for years, there have been games that have come and gone through my life, and there are games that I continue to play to this day, and it's those that I really want to be focusing on. It's, some game that I have this weird fascination with that I've never really been able to understand. Just why do I love this game so much? Sure, games are designed to be fun, generally, but these ones specifically, I have some kind of other aspect to them that I can't get over them. And this video is just kind of my attempt at researching and explaining why that could be. And remember, I'm a philosophy major in college, so as this video goes on, I'm going to be taking the time to explain all of the different ways in which we can think about why we like the things that we do, whether it's talking about our perception of the things around us, or whether it's talking about how things affect our well-being, all sorts of stuff like that you'll see as the video goes on. Also, this video is going to serve as a kind of introduction of myself to you all. I mean, I've already made one video before, but this video is more so a showcase of the things that I enjoy and kind of a showcase of how my mind works at the same time. So, hi, it's nice to meet you all. Also, spoiler warning, let's start super easy. If you've seen my last video, then you already know my opinion on Doki Doki Literature Club. If you haven't, then
You should go watch it.
now that we're all up to speed, let's all agree on one thing. DDLC is a good horror game. And if you don't agree with that, I don't like you. It's perfectly fine. Horror is a very subjective genre. We're not all gonna agree on the same things, but I don't really know if it can be argued that DDLC doesn't at the very least get very small things incredibly right. I got a lot of very nice comments on my DDLC video, and a lot of them really hit on the point that I'm trying to make here. Bruce Makes Games said, DDLC is one of the most horrifying games I've ever played. As a beginner horror game dev myself who used to make those stereotypical crappy jump scare fests, this game made me completely rethink everything I thought I knew about horror. I literally can't stop thinking about this game. First off, thanks for commenting, Bruce, and secondly, you make a really good point. DDLC isn't your stereotypical jump scare or cheap horror tricks fest. Yeah, sure, there is the Monica jump scare in the end game and Natsuki breaking her neck, and someone could argue that walking in on Sayori counts as a jump scare, but looking at the rest of this game, there's not too much going on in terms of cheap horror tricks. There's a brilliant aversion of expectation. The game plays into the fact that it is a game and not just another piece of horror media. And of course, all of the possible philosophic inquiries that come along with a game like this. Another comment I received spells this out pretty plainly and simply. Drew Childers commented, DDLC is such an anomaly of a game. It takes the dating sim visual novel format and really flips it on its head. It plays on the player's emotions perfectly and makes them expect a totally different type of game. It's psychological horror at its finest. Thank you for your comment as well, Drew, and I think you make a really good point here. DDLC plays on the player and also plays into the fact that it's a game. It's true with DDLC there aren't any scary monsters waiting for you at the end of hallways or any insurmountable challenges from beyond this world to torment you, but there doesn't need to be any of that stuff. It averts your expectations by taking potshots at your feelings while keeping itself fairly grounded and realistic. I mean, as an example of what I mean, Monica doesn't control the universe or anything. She isn't some specter that can magically change the laws of nature of our world. Monica can change her world's programming. She's inside of a game inside of your device. and it's not something that many people expect when they play through for the first time. And that's just brilliant design, especially taking into account that it was mainly just one guy that made all of it happen. And if the horror is too much for you, just boot up DDLC Plus's side stories for some free therapy and you'll be good to go. I'm not going to keep going on about why I love this game so much. If you want more of that, go check out my video on it. But I would consider it odd how infatuated I am with this game. I mean, just the other day, I had this come into the mail, and I own tons of DDLC t-shirts, and the second DDLC Plus was available for pre-order, I pre-ordered it, and I even used to make mods for a channel that's now long defunct on YouTube, just because I liked the game that much. Now, is liking the game itself generally a guilty pleasure of mine? I wouldn't say so, but is liking the game because it tickles my brain in a way that other games just don't? Probably. Anyway, on to the next game. If you grew up in the early 2000s, late 90s, or hell, maybe even nowadays, you have probably heard this music before. And if you haven't, well, good, I told you some of these would be really niche. For those who don't know, this is Wizard 101, a free-to-play fantasy MMORPG released in 2008 by the company KingsIsle, the creators of which were previously known for... In the game, you play your very own custom wizard who's enrolled as a new student in a magical school known as Ravenwood, but instead of getting a normal orientation, the main villain of the game attacks and sets up the first story arc. You have to learn spells, fight, and level up to save the game's fictional world known as the Spiral. It's pretty simple stuff. I've been playing this game ever since my brother introduced me to it back in 2009. And, you know, I haven't played it every single day of my life or anything, but any time I do start playing it, I don't tend to stop playing it for a really, really long time. I mean, back in 2018, the game was ported over to Steam, and on day one of that release, I created a new account on that Steam page just to install the game and play it fresh from the start again, and spent a little bit of time playing it. I'm unsure of how much time throughout my life I've spent playing this game. I've had tons of accounts over the years, but it's definitely a game that's always been there for me. I played it nearly every day after school when I was a little kid. Over this last summer break, in between semesters of college, I played it almost every day. Back in 2020 during lockdown, I found myself consistently going back to it. It's just always been there for me. It's one of those games where it seems like no matter how rough things are outside, there's always this magical world I can return to in-game and just escape for a little bit. So what makes this game a guilty pleasure of mine? Well, remember at the start of the video I said that I don't really have an answer to that question. I mean, I've played this game countless times over. I've seen every spell cast 1,000,000 times, and I fought every single battle you can name, and I'm still not bored with it. What gives with that? I mean, obviously one answer is that this game is a kind of comfort food, and because of that, it reminds me of when I was a little kid, and you know, I didn't have all these responsibilities, and I didn't have a job, and I didn't owe the government money. But why would I think like this? Well, philosophers have been trying to answer that question for a long, long time. Not why I think Wizard 101 is fun, it's about the perception and stuff. The philosopher Immanuel Kant is often summarized as having the view that we, as people, see the world through a certain pair of spectacles or glasses, and these glasses alter the way that we see or perceive the world, and they don't necessarily guarantee that the way that we perceive the world is actually the way that it is. And what's worse is you can't seem to take the glasses off.
Side note, everybody, as someone that's studied Immanuel Kant extensively in school, I cannot confirm nor deny that these are his actual views, but this is generally what a lot of people seem to think that he believed. Anyway, okay, bye.
If we take this assessment of Kant's view and apply it to this scenario here with the games on this list, I suppose we could come to the conclusion that, yes, my perception of the games on this list are just a result of the color or shape of my glasses. This view could also be referred to as a form of indirect realism, one of the two main views when it comes to the philosophy of perception. Indirect realism is the counter to the aptly named direct realism, which is simpler, so I'll start by explaining that. Direct realism, also called naive realism, is the view that everything that we see, experience, or generally perceive is just the way that the world is. If you see something, for example, what you are seeing is known as the object of perception. To the direct realist, an object of perception is not only perceived, but it's actually like that in the real world too. So imagine you perceive a tree that's far off in the distance. That tree is actually there in the real world. We can call this kind of view mind independent, as the world is the way it is independently of our minds. The counter to this, as mentioned earlier, is indirect realism, or representationalism. This is the view that essentially the way an object is perceived is dependent on the mind. When we perceive something in the world, we perceive it through a kind of veil known as our perception, which gives us what's called sense data. Back to the tree example, if you perceive a tree far off in the distance, then the tree gives you a kind of sense data of a tree, and there may or may not actually be a tree in the real world. Either way, you perceive that there is. Let's follow all of this thinking and apply it to Wizard 101 now. So let's start with direct realism. If we follow the direct realist model, then Wizard 101 is a game that exists in the real world and holds these very specific properties to it that, when I play the game, make me experience fun. Meanwhile, on the other hand, an indirect realist may say that Wizard 101 may or may not really exist in the real world, but it is perceived that it exists in a certain way that exudes these certain characteristics when it passes through my perception, and that is why Wizard 101 is fun. Sorta. Perception is a very complicated topic in philosophy, and there's lots of arguments that go back and forth about who's right and who's wrong, just like every other topic in philosophy. Okay, the point is that it's really, really complicated, and there's problems that come along with believing either direct or indirect realism. I mean, if you go with direct realism, then you have a lot of problems explaining stuff like mirages or illusions, and some people go as far as saying color can't be proved by direct realism, but if we go with indirect realism, then we're stuck having to explain what exactly it is that's processing all of this data. Direct realism has an answer for that, while indirect realism doesn't. So, yeah, this is getting really complicated. Let's just move on before we have to think about it anymore. I'm not a trained philosopher of mind, but maybe you have a different take on it. Is the world the way that it is when we see it, or experience it, or is there some kind of other part to this that we don't really know about? Or maybe it's something else. Leave your comment down below. I'd really love to hear your takes on this. All right, anyway, next game. So far in this video, I've touched on two games that are pretty much free games. I mean, DDLC is freely downloaded, and Wizard 101 markets itself as a free-to-play game. So why don't we do something a little bit more recklessly expensive? Rhythm games are fun. Whether you play Rock Band or Guitar Hero, Osu, Beat Saber, and so on, playing games where you get to play along with your favorite songs is incredibly fun. My favorite band is the Canadian rock band Rush, a band that even re-listening to their songs for the N-th time still gives me more and more to appreciate when it comes to music, and thus fuels me to listen to more music and play even more rhythm games to gain a deeper connection to the artistry found inside of music. So, rhythm game aficionados out there, you might be thinking that my favorite rhythm game is either going to be Rock Band 1 or Rock Band 2 or something like that, because I would be able to jam along to my favorite Rush songs, Tom Sawyer, Red Barchetta, The Trees, and so on, but there are actually two rhythm games out there that I hold in way higher regard than just about any other rhythm game out there. Two that don't even come close to having the crown taken from them of best rhythm game. And those games are Project Diva and Groove Coaster. More specifically, I should say the arcade versions of both of these games. I mean, just look at me go. And look, I know that both of these games have digital versions that you can download and play. As a matter of fact, I have both of these games downloaded on my Switch, and Project Diva specifically downloaded on my PS4, but to me, there just isn't any way that playing these games at home could come close to the satisfaction and intuitiveness that the arcade cabinets have. Alright, look, I know it wasn't a huge secret that I'm a little bit of a fan of Vocaloid, but why do I like these games so much? Okay, story time. So, a few years ago, I started college and was friends with a huge friend group, and one day we decided to go to the arcade. And at that arcade, I discovered, in the middle of the rhythm game section, a little arcade cabinet called Project Diva. And I proceeded to spend the next year and a half of my life to playing nothing else. Yeah, it was pretty bad how addicting it was. The addiction only got worse after I discovered Two Steps Over, the game Groove Coaster. If you've never played either of these before, I highly recommend starting with this one, as it's much simpler and easier to digest for newcomers to rhythm games. But now we're going to have to get back to the question at hand. Why do I play these games and love them as much as I do? You might be tempted to go back to the concepts that we just discussed, direct realism, indirect realism, or idealism and what have you. It's my perception about these games that really makes them a guilty pleasure of mine, but see, I don't think that's the case. I don't have the memories attached to Project Diva that I do for Wizard 101 or any other game like that. Instead, I think we need to focus on something that's referred to as prudential value. Prudential value is a term used to describe something that improves somebody's well-being. Essentially, if something is quote-unquote good for us, then it's said to have prudential value. Another way to think about this is through the terms instrumental value and non-instrumental or intrinsic value. If something is instrumentally valuable, then whatever it is a means to an end of improving your well-being. Think of money. Money doesn't do anything but get you other things. It's an instrument. Non-instrumental value, on the other hand, is something which is just directly good for somebody's well-being. I can't necessarily give an example of this, as it's debated what does and doesn't have non-instrumental value, but somebody who follows the tenets of hedonism, for example, would say that pleasure alone has non-instrumental value. Prudential value is then just the measure of how much goodness is found in or comes from whatever it is we're talking about. There are countless ways that you can talk about improving your well-being, and I don't nearly have enough time to go through all of them, but let's go through a few of them with keeping rhythm arcade games in mind. And since I brought it up first, let's start with hedonism. Hedonism is simply the view that what's good for us is determined by what, in the long term, gives us the greatest amount of pleasure and least amount of pain. That can also include something that takes pain away from us. I recently wrote an essay on hedonism and have a decent example to share with you to really drive home what this view is about. Imagine you're sick with a really bad cough. This cough causes you great discomfort and actual physical pain, and you just somehow know that it's going to last 5 days. You're told by someone to drink a medication designed to soothe coughing and reduce the pain, but you're also warned that the medication will taste fairly unpleasant and will last in your mouth for 3 days. At first, you might be tempted to write out the cough just to avoid having to endure the taste of the medicine, but from the hedonist point of view, it's very likely that they would take the medicine as, while the lasting flavor of the medicine is unpleasant, the feeling of relief that it gives is much more pleasant than dealing with the cough for a longer period of time. When first learning about hedonism, a lot of people seem to very quickly be drawn to it. I mean, it just seems to make intuitive sense that we live our lives pursuing pleasure and trying to avoid pain, but there are a lot of rebuttals to this, such as the idea that there's more to life than just trying to go for pleasure. I mean, maybe you go for knowledge or friendship or family or some other kind of love. These are just a few examples that you can name. Some people also argue against hedonism on the grounds that there seem to be some kind of pleasures that are bad. These are also referred to as base pleasures. An example of this would be the pleasure that somebody gets from torturing somebody or something messed up like that. Someone could construe hedonism to say that, well, since I'm torturing people and I get pleasure from it and I'm not getting any pain from it, and especially if I don't get caught in the long run, then I need to continue torturing people. But most people would say that this is not a way to improve your well-being. And there are other objections to hedonism, such as Nozick's experience machine, but that's a really complicated one, and I could go on for hours if you let me. But for now, let's move on to our next topic. Desire fulfillment theory, or DFT, states rather plainly that what's good for us is having our desires fulfilled. More specifically, though, people tend to utilize and follow what's called idealized desire fulfillment theory, or IDFT. This states exactly what regular DFT states, having desires fulfilled is good, but with the caveat that what's intrinsically valuable for somebody must connect somehow with what they would find desirable if they were completely rational and had all relevant information at their disposal. It might be a little bit tricky to understand the difference between DFT and IDFT and why the difference really matters, especially if you haven't studied any of this extensively. See, DFT has what's referred to as a scope problem. Essentially, it could be read in a way where there are certain desires that, if they were fulfilled, wouldn't improve your well-being at all. Imagine, for example, you want to eat 20 pizzas every single day for the rest of your life, as short as the rest of your life might be. DFT might be able to be read in a way that actually allows you to do that, while IDFT wouldn't. It would say that a fully rational version of yourself wouldn't actually want you to do that. That's just one example, and I could keep going on and on about desire fulfillment theory, but let's move on for now. Another idea people have developed to explain well-being is what's known as objective list theory, or OLT for short. OLT is not just a single theory, but an umbrella name for a type of theory that's created by somebody. Essentially, an objective list theory is any theory that says an object X, or objects X, Y, and Z, is or are objectively good for us. This theory develops from the objection I stated earlier about hedonism. More things than pleasure could end up being intrinsically good for us. Knowledge and healthy relationships with other people are commonly seen on various objective list theories, and it's argued that these things are used for value in themselves and aren't used as an instrument to gain something else. A common objection to OLT essentially goes as follows. How the hell do you know what's on the list? An objective list theorist's response might be something to the effect of, well, the things on my list are just clearly good for people objectively. Take knowledge, for example. Knowledge is commonly seen on a lot of objective list theorist lists. Knowledge is just good in itself. Why do you want to know things? Well, to know things, because it's good for us, and so it's kind of circular, and that shows that knowledge is in itself objectively good for us. And you can use it in an instrumental way, say using knowledge to get a job or some position that you want, but other than that, knowledge is just good to have generally. And there's also other problems that you can name, like hedonism having too few things on its list to actually be a proper theory of well-being, or desire fulfillment theory having way too many things on its list to be a proper theory of well-being. And I've been rambling on for a really long time about this. Where were we? Rhythm games. My point after all of this is that while I could apply the perception arguments that I did to Wizard 101, I don't think that my reasoning for obsessing over these games is the same. Wizard 101 may have something to do with perception, but I feel like I can tie these rhythm games into holding some kind of instrumental value. Yes, I'm very well aware that the theories of well-being I spoke about can be applied to Wizard 101, just as the theories of perception I talked about with Wizard 101 can be applied to this. All fields of philosophy are connected, but this is my video, damn it, and I'm going to talk about it how I want to. These two rhythm games for me are a tool. They're an instrument. They have instrumental value in getting me to prudential value. And what exactly is prudential value? Well, what do you think it is? Do you think the hedonist is right and pleasure is the only thing that we should pursue in our day-to-day lives? Or maybe there's some list of desires that we need to be fulfilling as our life goes along? Or maybe there's an objective list of things that are just inherently good for us? What do you think? I would love to hear your take in the comments. Anyway, that's enough rambling about well-being. On to the next game. I don't play mobile games. That's a good admission to start with. Alright, listen, let's be honest. The state of mobile gaming sucks and has sucked for a really long time. The mobile game Egg Inc. is actually kind of fun. Kind of a lot of fun. This game is another case of a game that's been around with me for a very long time. Not as long as Wizard 101, but back in the day, I used to play it essentially every single day. Even now, I have it re-downloaded on my phone and continue to make progress here and there throughout my day. Fun fact about me, back in my teenage and preteen years, I used to be a pre-professional dancer, and before any recitals or dress rehearsals or anything like that, I would actually be in the dressing room playing Egg Incorporated for a long time just to make time pass faster. I mean, I really had nothing else better to do. What else was I going to do? Practice? I mean, why do we play mobile games? No, seriously, why do we? It's rare that we hear anybody talk good about the direction mobile gaming has been headed in for the longest time now, and yet these games still rake in hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars every year, so clearly we're playing them even if we don't admit to liking it. Yeah, there's older people and way younger people that play mobile games, and there's a chunk of the revenue right there, but if we look at some easily accessible data, such as the study over on Zippia, we can see that people my age, between the ages of 18 and 24, seem to be the main culprits of a lot of mobile gaming. So, if we all seem to agree that we don't like this industry, why do we keep supporting it? Convenience. Alright, no, seriously, that's genuinely one of the reasons I think people play mobile games, is it's convenient. I mean, sure, you can take your Nintendo Switch just about anywhere, and you can play your 3DS at a bus stop if you want. People take laptops into cafes, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that play video games while they do that, but there's just nothing as convenient as this that you can carry around in your pocket, and our obsession with convenience actually has a name. It's referred to as the principle of least effort. People love convenience. I mean, we're willing to get a lesser amount of satisfaction just because it would involve putting in a higher level of effort. Even professional researchers whose job it is to get the best possible result and information are guilty of this. There's countless articles online that go into depth about this, and I'll even link one from Rutgers University into the description so you can actually give it a read, and maybe you'll even do some research and find out on your own. I'm personally not a psychology person, but I've studied a little bit here and there, and I think the topic is really interesting. Okay, let's stop playing around. One of the reasons mobile gaming is so hated is for the rise of microtransactions. If you're unfamiliar, microtransactions is a term for a business model where people who are playing a game are able to pay real money for items or rewards in-game. There are a lot of people who are quick to say that microtransactions are a problem. They allow companies to strong-arm players into spending their money just to do better at the game, while others say that it's just a mechanic that you don't have to participate in, so there's really no issue here. So here's a question for you. Are microtransactions ethical? A lot of people are very quick to say that yes, microtransactions are unethical and they need to be removed from gaming as quick as possible, but I don't think that's the right way to be looking at this. See, if you take a logic course or a philosophy of language course, one of the first things you're going to be taught is the difference between a sentence and a proposition. Now, a sentence is basically what you say, word for word, what it is that you say when you say it. But a proposition is what you mean when you say it. So when people say microtransactions are unethical, what I think is actually being expressed there is this business model is being implemented in a way that I deem unethical. And that might be a bit confusing, but here, I'll give an example so you know what I mean. Imagine you're at work, and there's a coworker that you just can't stand. We'll call them Jim. Maybe Jim's mean to you, or Jim's just bringing everybody down, whatever it might be. Down the line, a coworker asks how you feel about Jim. You respond by saying, Jim is definitely a coworker. This is a clear example of a sentence expressing a completely different proposition than what is said. Yes, it is very true that Jim is a coworker, as the sentence says, but by saying it in this way, in this context, the proposition that you don't like Jim very much has very clearly been expressed. In my view, microtransactions fall into that exact same category. You can't say that they're ethically good or ethically bad. They're ethically neutral, if anything. I mean, when someone says, I don't like microtransactions or microtransactions are unethical, what I think they're actually expressing is the proposition that they don't like the way that the company has handled this business model, and therefore they don't like the company. I mean, an example of this would be, do I really need to go into detail about Star Wars Battlefront 2 when that first came out, or even the idea of surprise mechanics? So, what's any of this got to do with eggs? Egg Inc. is filled to the brim with microtransactions. There's various currencies in the game that can be purchased with real money. There's an upgrade for your farm property that you can only get with real money. The game makes sure to remind you that you can put money into the game to get certain things. You cannot play the game and not know about the microtransactions. As stated earlier, I've been playing Egg Inc. for a very, very long time, and throughout all that time, even when I had to restart from scratch because I got a new device and couldn't transfer over my data, how much money do you think I've put into Egg Inc? Zero. Nothing. I haven't put a single dollar into Egg Incorporated. Sure, I could if I wanted to, and maybe that might help me progress a little bit faster, but it generally isn't a requirement, and so therefore I have to say microtransactions don't ruin video games necessarily. It's for this reason exactly that I think it's not microtransactions themselves we feel the need to attack, but instead it's the entire business model of certain games. Were the microtransactions in Battlefront 2 bad? Yeah, but only because the people behind them abused the entire business model into basically forcing people to pay for a game that they already spent money on. So, am I a fan of microtransactions then? No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm not endorsing them, nor am I denouncing them here. I'm not saying they need to be put into every single game, nor do they need to be taken out of every single game. As long as they aren't forced onto players to play the game, especially if it's a game they've already paid for, then I think it's perfectly fine. But am I a fan of Egg Incorporated? Yes, absolutely. I think the game is great, even with the microtransactions in it. But what do you think? Do you think that microtransactions are ethical or unethical? Do you think that the business model needs to be reworked, removed, or that it's actually a good thing for gaming as a whole? I would love to hear your takes. Leave them down in the comments. All right, enough rambling. Again, let's move on. All right, before we wrap up this video, there's at least one more section of games that I wanted to touch on. Think of these as the kind of honorable mentions to this video. They're games that still are guilty pleasures of mine, but I couldn't fit into the rest of the format of this video, or else it would be way too long. Another way to think about this is these are guilty pleasure games that kind of have an explanation as to why they're guilty pleasures of mine. You'll see what I mean in a second. The first honorable mention that I want to talk about is Half-Life 2. This game is by no means a guilty pleasure. This is without a doubt one of the most popular games of all time. So why put it in this video? Well, while Half-Life 2 is still by itself amazing all these years later, one of the most fun ways to play this game, and the way that I consider a guilty pleasure of mine, is playing Half-Life 2 backwards. By that, I don't mean picking the last chapter of the game and going sequentially backwards from there. What I mean is playing the game by incorporating the speedrunning tactic of accelerated backhopping. Essentially, by running forwards, jumping, turning around, crouching, and then repeatedly jumping, you can build up an insane amount of speed and can even use it to ramp off of anything with a slight upwards incline. Having played this game for a long time, it was only a matter of time before I would actually start to grow bored of it, but after discovering Half-Life 2 speedrunning and falling in love with the game all over again, I haven't really played the game normally since. If you haven't checked out Half-Life 2 speedruns, I highly recommend it, and maybe even get involved in it yourself. It's a fun community. Anyway, that's all for that one. Next game. Another game I can put into this category is the multiplayer horror game Dead by Daylight, but not for the reason you may think. See, I have never actually played even a second of Dead by Daylight, nor am I really interested in doing it either. Maybe if a group of friends and I were all together, but just joining random lobbies, that's not for me. Instead, what I like to do with Dead by Daylight is just watch other people's videos and then pretend as if I know everything about the game. From map layouts to the effects of the most obscure perks, I get this weird kind of satisfaction from just watching these videos and reacting as if I actually understand everything that's happening. No, seriously, I mean that. I could be watching someone play as one of the killers in the game and say, alright, today I'm running a build consisting of the perks Kill Your Friends, Disembodied Birdbeak, and On the Run Pig Serial Murderer, and I just nod along to all of it as if I understand a single thing that's just been said to me. Why? I don't know, but it certainly is guilty pleasure of mine. Alright, that doesn't feel right to end the video like that. I mean, I literally admitted that I've never played Dead by Daylight, and this is a video about guilty pleasure games that I play. So let's at least end this video with something a little bit more wholesome. Bonnie's Bakery. This is a cutesy 2D fast food them up, similar to games like Diner Dash if you've ever played that series. You play as Bonnie, the owner of the titular Bonnie's Bakery, and have to make sure all of your customers' orders are prepped quickly and correctly. This game is going to be the one that I end on because it's really niche, and I haven't met anyone that's ever played this, and I don't really hear people talking about this one too much. I mean, it's a game that whenever I boot it up, I instantly start smiling from all the bright colors and cute character designs, and I mean, there's definitely nothing else to this game. I mean, there's definitely nothing underneath Bonnie's Bakery. And here we are at the official end of another one. That took way longer than I intended it to, but if you stuck around to the end, just like the last one, I hope you enjoyed it. More importantly, I hope you got something out of this video, whether it's thinking about something that you had never thought about before, or maybe you had already previously known about these topics but just hung around to see what else you could learn about it. In either case, thank you for sticking to the end. And speaking of playing guilty pleasure games, I actually want to make a follow-up to this video where I play you guys' guilty pleasure games. So if you have something that fits the description of what I've spoken about in this video, please drop it in the description and I'll start compiling a list, and then at some point I'll start one by one going through each of these games. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to be tearing through these games like I did with these ones. I'm not going to be talking about how Donkey Kong Country is actually an allegory for meth. Essentially, I just want to do a kind of Let's Play series, if you want to call it that. We're just going to be having some fun playing games together, but if anything philosophical comes up in the video, then I'll be sure to try and have a conversation about it at some point. And other than that, I just want to learn what it is that you guys like playing. And outside of all of this, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'm Danny Chase, and make sure that you're subscribed, make sure you like the video if you enjoyed it, and make sure to drop all of your hot takes down in the comments below. Bye now.